Hey, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. Mike Montague here with Sandler, and my guest is Ben Hardy. He is a world-renowned author. I'm counting 8 books here, Ben. He has 6 kids, so I'm wondering which one takes most of his work most of the time. He's very prolific. He is also going to be the main stage speaker at our Sandler Summit. It's March 16th and 17th in Orlando. That's Ben's home now. And you can join us. Tickets are on sale. You can go to Sandler.com/summit. I'll do that up here for you as well. But Sandler.com/summit. Join us in Orlando. You can find Benjamin Hardy at BenjaminHardy.com. Not really hard to remember. All right, Ben. Welcome to the podcast. Tell me a little bit about your book, Be Your Future Self Now. That's what you'll be talking about at the Sandler Summit. And maybe just a sneak peek, a 30-second commercial about what people hear in that book or in your talk.
Absolutely. Super happy to be with you, Mike, by the way, and I'm really excited to come to Sandler. I've got some good friends who've been in Sandler for a long time, so I know this is an amazing community. So Be Your Future Self Now is a deep dive into what is becoming the hottest, it is a surging topic in psychology. So you'll probably start to see future self everywhere. In fact, in one of the recent Psychology Today magazines, it was all about future self. And basically what coaches, but also what therapists are finding is that the only way to really get someone to make positive changes in their life is to get them emotionally connected to their future self, to get really clear on who your future self is. This is sort of similar to even what Viktor Frankl was talking about way back when in Man's Search for Meaning. In that book, obviously that's about him surviving the Holocaust. But what he found was that the only way people could survive the rigors of the concentration camps is if they had a purpose or a meaning or some form of hopeful goal to pursue. And so the idea is that if they have a why to live for, they can bear anyhow. So basically in this book, I'm just going to break down all of the latest science on future self. I'm going to share some of the biggest threats that are posing your future self that you should be aware of, but also some of the biggest truths of your future self. One of them being that your future self is radically different than you expect. And obviously you're not the same person you were in the past. And then I will show you very practical strategies on how you can start visualizing your future self and ultimately shifting your identity so that you can start being your future self now, so that you can start doing what your future self would do and generating the results your future self would have. So very practical, very science-based, and it's going to just be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. You've been on the podcast before, so people can go back and search previous episodes. I think we talked about personality isn't permanent and that we do change over our lives, and how different you were from 10 years ago is likely to be how different you are 10 years from now. And I think people miss that a lot. I also love your book, Willpower Doesn't Work, The Gap and the Gain, and Who Not How with Dan Sullivan from Strategic Coach. Awesome books. But I think that is kind of my initial question about attitude here for most people, is that they kind of feel like, I feel like people make a mistake of thinking that they have one passion or purpose, and that if whoever they decided to be in 5th grade on career day is who they have to be if they want to be successful or happy or fulfilled. And I love your message that changes over time. And I think even, you did Who Not How, but I think when people think about what they want to be when they grow up, how they want to be is more interesting, right? Or who they want to be is a much better question than what do you want to be? Because we all pick firefighters and astronauts and princesses, and those aren't really great careers for adults. Can you tell me a little bit about maybe the common misconceptions that people have around their personality, passion, and future self?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll share some thoughts on my opinion of powerful attitudes for learning, growth, change, etc. I think that one of the most useful tools or techniques when you're thinking about your past, present, and future selves is regularly recognizing and framing even your current versus your past self. So even me, for example, like I'm filming this, you and I are talking on January 19th. And I've gone through some big changes even in the last 19 days, such that I'm not the exact same person. If you and I were talking 19 days ago, we'd be having a slightly different conversation. I've actually gone through a lot. And so you're not the same person you were in the past, certainly not 10 years ago, certainly not 3 or 4 years ago, and even not even 12 months ago, you're not the same person. And I think it's very useful and powerful for a lot of reasons to continuously recognize and see that. That's actually also one of the ways that you can squeeze the most out of your past so that you can learn the most from it. But then when it comes to future self, one of the, so Daniel Gilbert, he's a Harvard psychologist who spent 15, 20 years studying this topic. He said that the primary thing that plagues most people's future selves is that most people spend very little time genuinely thinking about it. We may be thinking about things in broad strokes, like, yeah, I want to be retired at age 60 or something like that. And certainly our future does drive our present. But people don't utilize the concept well enough. So like a recent example of someone who I love that utilizes it very well is David Goggins. David Goggins is obviously very famous, but he talks a lot about visualization. He says that visualization is one of the absolute things he spends the most time doing, but it's not about just, yes, you want to visualize a broad future self, for example, me in call it 10, 15 years. And I want to think in terms of what are the core aspects of what I want my life to look like, or who do I want to be like? But when you're thinking, so that would be more like a macro future self. But in terms of a micro one, call it 1 year out, or even 3 months out, or even, at the event, it's, the event in March. It's very powerful to visualize your future self in a specific situation at a certain milestone. So for example, this could be like a runner finishing a marathon at a certain speed and like continuously seeing themselves at that finish line with the time. And so it's very powerful if you use your future self to visualize yourself hitting certain milestones, and then using a concept called Parkinson's law, making the timelines really short. Parkinson's law is basically just the idea that work fills the space you give it. If you give yourself a year, it'll take a year. If you give yourself 3 months, it'll take 3 months. And so if you give yourself pretty dang compressed timelines and seemingly impossible goals, it's actually very useful to have goals that are very, very big stretches, but short-term stretches, so that you're kind of doing a massive sprint towards a highly visualized, call it a milestone or an outcome. That can really change what you do in the present. This is one of the keys to, I guess you'd say, clicking your identity towards your future self. So one other just, I think, super useful thing with this is, and this comes to attitude, is recognizing that your current self, this is a big aspect of a growth mindset, by the way, is recognizing that your current self is radically incomplete and unfinished, and that even in a week from now, you'll know a lot more than you know now. So this lends to being comfortable seeking failure or seeking feedback and not needing to have all the answers now. Like my current self is very ignorant, etc. And my future self in a week, month, or in 3 months is going to know a lot more. And so that leads me to being comfortable seeking information, being curious, rewriting my mental models, learning a lot. And so it just allows you to have way more of a growth mindset if you recognize your future self will be different, and to not cling to your current self.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And some of the really cool lessons in your book, 10X is easier than 2X, is that when you look for these little tiny growth things, I feel like sometimes you can stress out. And maybe that's not bad, looking for small things. But when you force yourself to look at big changes or 10X, or think about what you'll be like 10 years from now, we really have trouble even fathoming that sometimes, that what technology will be like 10 years from now, or how good we'll be, and how healthy we'll be, or how different and smart. And the books that we can read over 10 years really changes the game a lot. And that makes a lot of other things possible. So for me, it's funny. It just happened today, Ben, as my first podcast was in 2007, when I guess I would have been like 28 years old or so. And I was in radio, and I just listened to the first episode because I was doing another.
You went back and listened to it for fun?
Yeah, the very first episode I ever did. And I was like, you know what? That's actually pretty good for a 27-year-old kid who'd never podcasted before. And the audio.
Good to give your past self some credit. It's good to give your past self some credit, right?
Yeah, but then thinking about where I'll be, or the guest that I'll have on 16 years from now, is a completely different place. And I think the one thing that I regret about it is that I quit that podcast. If I had continued that single one, I could be Joe Rogan now, right? And so I think,
who knows,
that
right?
That's one of the lessons here that I want to ask you about behavior, because doing the right thing at the right time and consistently, or giving things enough time to work, I think are really difficult questions. At the time, giving up that podcast was easy because I was moving from entertainment to advertising and sales. And so I wanted to shift my focus. But I just think, man, what if I had held on to that? Or what if I had just kept going? And I feel like these are really tough questions when we're thinking about big, hairy, long-term goals, knowing when to pivot and when to stay with it. What do you think?
So I'll give you a similar but different example. So my first book, which I have right here, I'm not going to hold up, but Willpower Doesn't Work. Willpower Doesn't Work came out almost exactly 5 years ago. And so this led me to an interesting reflection, right? And so the reflection was, and I think this is a very useful reflection, is I was thinking, okay, so it's been 5 years. So what I did, and I encourage people to do something similar. You could even do it honestly from that first podcast episode. You choose whatever timeline you want, whatever timeline is relevant. It could be 3 years, it could be 1 year, it could be 5, it could be 10. But I'm using a 10-year timeline because that's a relevant one for me, because that's when my first book came out. What I did was I just literally wrote down on a single page all of the things that occurred during that 5-year span that either I was proud of or that represented progress towards my future self, progress towards my goals. It could even be just key experiences, right? Certainly, since in the last 5 years, we adopted 3 kids and had 3, right? I finished my PhD, wrote 6 books, and so I was writing these things down. It's been a very busy 6 years, but at the exact same time, busyness doesn't necessarily equal progress. And so I just wrote down the list without shame towards my past, without frustration, or without even like overly inflating my ego. It was more just like writing it down. And then I looked at it and I just said, if I was thinking in terms of just genuine progress, not in terms of volume of work, not in terms of busyness, not in terms of amount of activity, but in terms of just genuine progress, could I actually experience close to, if not more, tangible progress, qualitative, not necessarily quantitative progress, just in 2023 alone, as I have in the last 5 years, if I was operating as my future self, if I was a lot more committed, a lot more courageous, maybe weeding out the things that didn't matter? And the answer was absolutely yes, because the truth is even if I was looking at my last 5 years, even though a lot of it's been really great, using the 80-20 principle, I would still argue that around 80% of my time, truly, in the last 5 years, was on stuff that didn't necessarily move the needle. And I'm not mad at my past self. This is what learning is all about. There's no reason to be mad at your past self or even the trajectory you're on, because that does nothing for your future self. But genuine, honest self-evaluation and just looking at things and then thinking, okay, based on what I know now, if I was really committed towards my future self, if I was a lot clearer on my goal, and if I was more willing to say no to things, what could I do in 1 year? And it's just amazing what you can do. Even then using Parkinson's law, compress it down to just Q1. What could you do just in Q1 if you were operating more as your future self, if you were being more bold, committed, courageous, if you were letting go of the things that you already knew were conflicting towards your future self? One really last thought right here, and then just is you can know that something is not useful to your future self, even though it may have been very useful to your past self, because it's just no longer profitable. Like, what I mean by profitable is like the bang isn't as much worth the buck. Like, it's that whole idea of what got you here won't get you there. Like, there's certain situations, relationships, etc., that were very valuable to my past self. But if I'm really honest about my future self, which continues to expand, holding on to even certain habits or ideas is going to dramatically hold back my future self. And so you really want your future self to be the filter for what you say yes and no to.
I like that a lot, because I think it gives us permission to forgive our past selves, but also not have that sunk cost fallacy that just because we got a degree in accounting means we need to do accounting for the rest of our life. Like, we need to make decisions and choices that make our future self and future life better. And that allows us a lot of flexibility. And I like the way you approach it. I wanted to ask you one more tough question about behavior, which is, we all have that up and down. I think about like casino slot machine payouts, and sometimes we can get tricked by an artificial high, or we can get too depressed when we get a loss, and we need to kind of maybe measure our growth over those longer time periods, because that allows us to kind of forget and adjust for those up and downs of every day. So what would you say for somebody, particularly now? I feel like the year over the last 3 years really has been unpredictable and more volatile, making better decisions about where they're going long term, or sticking with stuff even if we happen to be in a temporary trough?
It's a really awesome question. I'll share with you a few thoughts that have been kind of relevant to me. One is, like if you've got your highs and your lows, right? You could even look at it as ceiling and floor. And that could be like in terms of your behaviors, your peer group, right? You've got people at the top of your network, right? These are like your friends that like really make you better, right? And open up lots of doors. Whereas you got maybe some of the floor would be like the people around you who sort of hold you back, one way or another. So the thing that has helped me a lot lately is, rather than focusing so much on the ceiling, which is the easy thing to focus on, which is like, how do I keep raising my income? Or, I actually have been focusing very much lately on my floor and raising my floor. Because your floor is the harder thing to raise. Like, just as an example, on a daily basis, we all have a ceiling and a floor. in terms of our eating, right? You may eat some really healthy food, right? You might go to the gym, but then you've got your floor, right? You get stressed out, you drink that soda or what I don't really know what it is, right? You also have like a floor and a ceiling on like your technology use. Like maybe you wake up and your morning has a really low floor. Like you wake up and you immediately start scrolling and like you're reactive, right? And so the floor really represents your true standard as a person. Like if you had a higher standard, then you wouldn't go below it. Like a standard is a commitment, and a commitment is your identity. Your identity is basically what you're most committed to as a person, and it also reflects your standards. It also reflects your story and your, how you describe yourself, but it definitely represents your standards as a person. And your standards are basically what you say yes and no to. And so by just raising your standard, right, where you've elevated the floor, whatever that looks like for you. For me, as an example, I'm someone who really enjoys watching sports commentary. I just enjoy it. And so like raising my floor would be, rather than doing it 5 hours a week, maybe I do it 1 hour a week, right? Where it's like, I've just raised my floor 5x, right? But the thing that happens is that when you do that, because your floor is actually the main indicator of your future self. Yes, the ceiling is nice and it's good to really imagine your future self and really courageously charge towards your future self. But in the end, you really want to raise your floor, which is just your standard for what you say yes and no to. And when you do that, that's where you actually start shifting yourself on the subconscious level, because it's harder to say no to things that you typically say yes to, that you already know are bad for you, honestly.
Yeah.
But when you do that, when you just raise the floor, even call it 5 or 10%, what naturally happens, because subconsciously you're now more in alignment. You're no longer as self-conflicted. You have less cognitive dissonance. Naturally, actually, your ceiling transforms like insanely. Like when you just raise your floor, because it's kind of similar to the idea of how you do anything is how you do everything. That when you raise that up, you have a lot more confidence, a lot more self-alignment. You're being a lot more honest with yourself, and also a lot more honest with your future self. So that's one thing that I would just invite people to think about. I've also recently been pretty obsessed with the book Anti-Fragile, which is just, I don't know if you ever read that book.
No, I haven't read that one yet, but I've heard it. I'm looking.
Yeah, I read it like 5 years ago, but I've been going through it multiple times now. And he has similar perspectives. Like Anti-Fragile is just the idea of like anything that has like, so time creates entropy. Entropy is the idea that things break down with time, right? So if I'm around for 50 more years, I'm going to be pretty tired, right? And 50 years from now, and like something that's like a glass vase is very fragile. Like with enough time and with enough volatility, that vase is going to fall off the table and break, right? And you just mentioned volatility. Like we live in a volatile world, volatile market. And so things which are fragile, over enough period of time and over enough period of volatility, they break down. Whereas the opposite is what he describes as anti-fragile, which is that over a long enough period of time and over a long enough period of volatility, these things get better. So it's just the idea of getting better with time and with volatility. And one of the things that he suggests is exactly what I'm suggesting to you, which is removing things from your life right now. This could be people, honestly, it could be bad habits. It could be just things you already know over the test of enough time are going to have negative effects. Seriously. So it's like the more you can remove things that you already know down the line are going to hurt you, the more anti-fragile your future self gets. And this is one of the most anti-fragile things you can do, is just continuously remove the things that you already know aren't going to serve your future self.
I love that. Several things there for me. One is I love raising the floor. I think even in the podcasting and stuff that I do, if my worst episode is still better than my last worst episode, then I'm not trying to live up to that one that went viral and that one that got thousands of downloads. You're like, okay, it's great. That one got 25,000 downloads, but I'm not seeing that every week. I start getting depressed. But if I start noticing that my floor, the worst ones, are going up, then that's a good indication of progress. I like that.
Yeah. Or even your average ones. Like maybe your average episode gets, I'm just going to throw it around, 5,000 views, right? But like maybe you raise the floor so that in the future, your average episode gets 10,000 views, right? Like that's a huge representation of true change. Yeah. And nice. Every once in a while you get the biggies that just blow off. But if you can just raise the consistency of the floor on a daily basis, as an example, and this could be in terms of your output, right? I might have a floor
for salespeople. It's great,
exactly.
right? If you think about either your worst call or your smallest sale, if you're raising that bar consistently, you're going to be doing more and more sales. You're going to have greater output. And if your worst week or your worst month out of the year is better than your worst one from the previous year, chances are you're covering the bases, you're paying your bills, you're doing all right. And then your best ones will grow. You're going to have to get better in order to do that. So I really love that lesson tactically. That's great.
That's just like true foundational growth. And also the more firm your foundation, like as an example, your health, right? Like let's just say that you've really raised your floor on your health so that 90% of the time you're super healthy, you get really good sleep. In such conditions, you can afford taking big shots, right? Like, and so like if you have a really clean foundation, and this is something even Kobe Bryant talked a lot about before he passed, was that he had such a secure foundation that he could take really big leaps. He could take big risks. He could be really creative because his foundation was so secure, which came through all the practice, healthy relationships. And so, yeah, if you have a really clean foundation, then you actually have the bandwidth, the space, and honestly, just the peace of mind to make big leaps, which may have radically outsized returns.
I love that. I also wanted to highlight your mentioning there of like the anti-fragile. I think people confuse like things that are alive with tools and lessons. So yeah, computers slow down, they wear down, they break and stuff. Human beings under stress and under pressure get stronger. They get that anti-fragile thing going on where the more you test yourself, the better you become, and you actually gain confidence through failure and not through successes. Sometimes when you succeed, you get that imposter syndrome and your confidence starts to wane. When you fail and a temporary failure and you overcome it, that's where I feel like true confidence comes from. You learn how to go past that. And I'll give you just one more shot at it here. Any tips, tricks, hacks, or techniques you love to share? Or I'll give you the question and you get to choose how we end. What's the difference between reading your books, watching your YouTube videos? I subscribe to your channel and everything. I definitely recommend people check that out. And seeing you live, what do you think people will get away different from the live experience? What do you think?
Yeah, I'll just answer the last one, which is I think that there's something very special about being in person, being immersed in an environment. It's kind of similar to saying like, does it feel the same to go swimming as it does watching a video of someone swimming? It's just not the same experience. And so when you're actually immersed in an environment, you're a lot more susceptible to inspiration, ideas. Like you're in a different place. And I've heard it said like set and setting, like you want the right like mindset, which would be set, but you also want the right setting. Those two things together can create really interesting, unexpected ideas, insights, transformation. I try to apply that in a lot of different ways. Like as an example, when I do my morning journaling, like I try to put myself in the right mindset, right? But I also try to put myself in the right setting. I don't have my phone clicking, pinging and dinging. Like I try to really create the environment such that I can get, whether it be inspiration from God, whether it just simply be like subconscious breakthroughs, whether it be creative breakthroughs, whether it be just ideas. So I think being in the right environment is one thing, and environments can really, there's so much research on this, but your environment largely shapes the thoughts you think. I've been in environments where I was, I had the right mindset. I came in prepared. I had prepared myself in advance so that my mind could be open and reflective and actually be like fertile soil for really good ideas and insights. But I've been in environments where, because I was in the right setting, things hit me at such a level that I was able to make massive and exciting changes that I wouldn't have been able to make had I not been there in person. So I definitely think there's huge, and obviously, I don't know if some people are gonna be watching it via Zoom, and if they can, it's, you can still apply the same principles, get yourself in the right setting, but being there in person, it's just a different experience, different animal. I obviously, when I'm performing something live and in person, I come at it with a much different energy because I feel like you want to be in the setting. So yeah, I'm excited for those who will be there live. It's going to be powerful. It's going to be fun. And I definitely just invite you to prepare so that your mind is ready, so that you can really connect with your future self and ultimately make bigger commitments. At the end of the day, your identity, like I said before, is what you're most committed to. And so the whole purpose of learning and growing in education is to get yourself committed to something more specific and better so that you can then become who you want to be.
I really appreciate you sharing that. And I totally agree with you. I think the difference is the energy and the focus. You can watch at home and you can get the knowledge and you can read the books and you can get the knowledge. But when you take 2 days out for yourself, where you're not answering the phone, where you're in this with other people, and that energy comes up, the big stage, the lights, the whole thing, it brings a different setting to it and a different energy that allows you to kind of focus and lock in and really hear somebody, where you probably, if you were at home and you had your email open and you're watching a 40-minute, video recording of it, you're not going to have the same attention and intensity to the message. So that's great. I have one last question for you. I always like to get to know our guests a little bit better. And you talk about future self, and you're going to be talking about being your future self now. The book, everybody that attends the summit's going to get a copy of the book too. So I haven't mentioned that yet, which is awesome. But join us in Orlando and you get the book. Now, how would you describe your future self? I'm sure you've done the work because you always practice what you preach. How would you describe it?
So obviously there's different timelines on future self, right? So I'm 35 years old as we're speaking. If we're talking, call it like one, there's different timelines. I'll give you one timeline just because this is again relevant. And I think it's helpful, even if you're looking at your past, to choose relevant milestones. And when you're looking in the future, it's useful to create milestones. So I'll give you two timelines. One is I'll give you 2030, because 2030 is, call it 7 years from now. That's when so we adopted 3 kids from the foster system, siblings. They are now 15, 13, and 11. So that 11-year-old will be in 7 years, 18 years old, right? And so he's going to go off and do a church mission or something like that, or go to college. And so our younger 3 that are biological are much younger. Like in 4 years, they'll be like 11. We got 2 twin girls who are 4 and then a 2-year-old boy. So they'll be 11 and 9. So by that point in time, like our older 3 kids will be gone. Me and my wife are probably going to move away from Orlando and we're going to go adventure. Like we're going to go, we're going to go do different things. I imagine at that point in time, certainly I'll still be writing books. I imagine I'll have written some pretty big blockbusters at that time. I have specific goals in terms of finances and things like that. But I also think at that point in time, I'll be spending probably 80% of my work time more doing leadership training and development within my church, just to be fully honest with you. So that's something that I'll still do. I'll still be writing mainstream business books and self-development books, but that's probably where I'll be. If we were to go, call it 2 years from now, probably we'll have cranked out another 3 or 4 books. I'm looking at some various collaborations that will be pretty interesting. And my main goals for that are just to help my older 3 kids as much as possible in their own goals and pursuits. My main goals, honestly, for the next 2 or 3 years are really around family, books, and finances, straight up. Like just helping my older 3 kids, especially writing better books that reach millions of people, and just putting my family in the most anti-fragile financial position as possible. And so those are the main things for me right now.
Love it. Great answers. Double down on all of that. Once again, we're talking with Benjamin Hardy, Dr. Benjamin Hardy, He is also the keynote speaker at the 2023 Sandler Summit. It is March 16th and 17th. Go to sandler.com/summit. Get your tickets now. There are virtual options, but if you come live, you're going to get Benjamin Hardy's book and get to see him live on stage following our CEO, David Mattson, in the opening keynote. And as always, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. Hit like, share this with somebody that you think needs to hear it. We love that. And until next time, whatever you are, be a good one. That's what I always say. Have a great week, everybody.